Hi guys, if you're seeing this, just be patient. We're not going to actually get started until right at 8, but I just wanted to give a few minutes for all the technology to work itself out. So we are here. We will be getting going in just a few minutes. So feel free to go ahead and say hi in the chat if you're on, so that we know who all is on. And while you're doing that, while you're telling us who all's here, how many of you have made a fabric tumbler before? Would be the other part to that question. So come on in, join us in the chat. Let us know that you're here. I'm just getting a couple things straight so that everything is within reach. And then we will be ready to get going shortly. Francine, welcome. Fantastic. So one thing to keep in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any guys in here yet, but we have about a minute delay. So if you ask a question, give me about a minute or so to answer it, at least, because it's between Facebook's delay and the software's delay, we have about a minute delay. Upper Michigan, we have an office in the Upper Peninsula up there in Marquette. Hello, Susan. Hello. Tanya's new. Naomi's here. Teresa's here. Hello, hello. We are getting ready to get going here in just a few minutes. I need to copy this link over to the event. And that'll be the last technical piece, and then we will be set to get going. So we will get going here in just a second. Getting all the technical pieces working, so we are set. Okay. Awesome, Brenda. I really don't know my geography up there, except for that's where we have an office. So I fail on that account. So bear with me just a little bit tonight, guys. We are working on some camera angles. I'm trying to get it all going. If you see me looking down, your questions are over here in front of me. Camera is up over here because in a second I'm going to turn you so you're looking at my mat. So let's talk supplies real quick. It's right at 8:01, so we'll go ahead and talk supplies. I had posted a thing in the actual event about supplies, so just in case you didn't see it, there we go, you're catching up. Okay, will this be on repeat? Betsy, it is always available on replay in the event. So hopefully that answers that. Again, keep in mind, guys, I have about a minute delay. So whenever you ask a question, I'll take about a minute before you hear the answer. A minute after I say it before you hear it. So the first thing we need for this step, we need our tumbler. Prep to whatever extent you prefer to prep it. So I prepped this one just with white spray paint, and actually it's not even a very good spray paint job. You can see where the red's coming through a little bit. That's okay for me because my fabric is mostly dark with some white accents. So I am okay with this. This was actually a cup I stripped and I'm reusing. So be it. I prefer to have mine on my football arm, but that's personal preference. I prefer, I spray paint, I Mod Podge, I do everything with it on the arm. I just find it easier for me, but personal preference. I also like to have my drying rack nearby if you're somebody who uses one, just as an easy place to put my tumbler down when there's fabric. The next thing you're gonna need your Mod Podge. I don't care what Mod Podge you use. In fact, if you guys want to take a vote, I will use any of these tonight, and I would use whatever else, but these three are in my hand. So I have glossy, outdoor, dishwasher safe. I've used all of the above. I've also used the glittery one, but I'm not using glitter on this fabric. It just wouldn't make sense. But any Mod Podge that you like. Some people like the really thick Mod Podge, so they prefer like the outdoor or the hard coat, the purple one. Some people use what you have. Don't go buy more Mod Podge if you already have Mod Podge. It doesn't matter. All Mod Podge is basically the same. Some sort of brush for your Mod Podge. Again, I will probably use a foam brush for my bottom layer. I usually do. And then I have just came in a kit for a couple dollars. I don't know, cheap paintbrush if my foam starts to wear down. Scissors of some sort, whatever kind of sharp scissors you prefer. So I'm a mess. I never know which scissors are actually sharp, so I have several with me. These are one of my favorites for this just because they're small and I can get a really nice close cut. These are the Cricut scissors. Or if you're a fabric dishwasher safe, I've got that. It's right here. We can use that one tonight. If you're a fabric guru and you just really are protective of your fabric, rotary blade will work as well. So some people prefer to use this on fabric. Whatever you have nearby. Doesn't really matter. They all are going to do the same. And that's really it. I'm going to use a little plastic cup to put my Mod Podge in just because it's easier, in my opinion. And then that gets us down to fabric. So, do you sand the cups for the fabric ones? So sanding to me is always a little bit of personal preference. And it depends a little bit on what your base cup is. If you've got one of those super slick, painted, then I tend to give it a little bit of a sand. If it's already just a stainless, I typically don't. If it's the powder coated, I usually give it a light sand. And I just sand with a sanding block, so it's not a big deal. Sanding's personal preference. I used Rust-Oleum 2-in-1. Maybe it was Krylon. It was one or the other. It was either Rust-Oleum or Krylon 2-in-1 white spray paint. And this one I don't think was sanded, just based on what I can see through. Like I said, this was one that I had stripped and just threw some fresh spray paint in some spots to reuse. I'm going to grab a Lysol wipe real quick on my scissors because I've got glue. I'm just going to put them within reach. So it would be something else maybe you want is baby wipes, Lysol wipes, something if you get Mod Podge on your scissors. If you're somebody that bothers. Yes, so mine is either Rust-Oleum or Krylon 2-in-1 spray paint, just white. And honestly, I don't remember which one I spray painted this in. I have them both. I use them both. People say Rust-Oleum is more finicky with changes in humidity, and Krylon is more fidgety with changes in temperature. I might have that backwards. One does better in humidity and one does better in temperature. So use what works for you. So that's a good place to take out your craft journals and try prepping with both and see which works best in your personal conditions. I was just wiping off my scissors. I don't know if you guys could see it. I probably was off camera, but I had a bunch of dried on glue from a prior project. So I was just wiping them off. All right, so let's talk about fabric for a second. Since we're doing a fabric tumbler. You want a fabric that is, I'm gonna say for your first several, not stripes, not something where you have to line up exactly without it being obvious. So, for example, this one that I made and I use all the time, my seam is there. You can definitely see it, but it's not like my stripes don't line up or something crazy, right? It kind of blends. This is another one. This is one where the seal has been broken. Somebody put it in the dishwasher, so it is going to get redone. But again, because of the fabric, I'm looking for where the seam is. I maybe don't even know where the seam is on this one. Here it is on this side, but it kind of blends, right? You don't really see it because of the fabric. So pick a fabric that is not going to make it super obvious if your seam doesn't line up, especially if you're using a 30 ounce like this. Tip 1. I would say don't start with an all white fabric or a predominantly white fabric. Use something with some color, even if the color is black. But a pure white is going to show your flaws the most. So keep that in mind. The last sort of piece would be you want something that's fairly sturdy. So like a cotton or a like quilter's cotton, fat quarters, something along those lines is going to be your best bet. It doesn't have too much stretch. Now this fabric I'm working with tonight, because I'm fixing a cup, is actually has a lot more stretch in it than I would prefer. So usually I would stabilize this first. I didn't. So we're just gonna do it. So that would be my tips on fabric for the first time. Do we have any other questions before we switch the camera and get going? I'm seeing lots of hellos, so hello to everybody. Remember, we have about a minute long delay, so bear with me on that one. It's a little longer than most of you are used to working with on Facebook, and that's okay. All right, I don't see any other questions coming in yet. If anything pops up, feel free to leave me a question and we'll get there. Hopefully I'll see it. So I am going to start with, I'm just putting everything else off to the side. I'm going to just take my tumbler and I'm going to take my fabric. Hello, Kylan. And see, I haven't even like pre-trimmed this fabric down for you guys. So we're doing this from the very beginning. So I am going to start, and this first part is just going to be super rough. And all I'm going to do, make sure I'm in frame, is lay the tumbler down, make sure I'm giving myself plenty of room. I'd rather give myself too much room at this point than not enough. And I'm going to just gently wrap the fabric around till I get to a point where I'm like, that's a good spot to cut it. Not super close, just enough that I have some work. Yes, Anna, we are live. I am just going to cut this down because this is a really big piece to contend with. So like you just saw, it's a really rough cut. It is possibly way bigger than it needs to be. Actually, we know it's way bigger than it needs to be, but I'd rather it be too big. I'm gonna trim it down. Okay, now I've got a piece that's a little bit more manageable to work with. So, first thing I'm going to encourage is take a look at your fabric, see if it matters which end is up. I really don't think it does in this fabric. Yeah, these guys are all different directions, so it's not going to matter which end is up. Susan, because this fabric has a lot more stretch than I wanted, and it's got these white patterns on it, and I was reusing a cup that was already painted. Is that enough reasons? All right, so I'm going to take my cup. As I just said, it doesn't matter on this fabric which end is up. So it doesn't matter. So I'm going to begin by giving myself a good chunk at the top because we are going to trim this down regardless. So I'm not worried about the fact that it's not lined up because it's a 30 ounce. It's not going to stay lined up anyway. When we come around. And I'm just going to once again make sure I cut myself an adequate piece. I might flip this. Hold on. There we go. It's going to go better that way. So that's another thing. Think about which way you cut it as to which way makes the most sense. So now we're going to we're going to start with our Mod Podge, and I'm not worried about this rough edge at this point. I'm not worried about the fact it's going to hang over at this point. We will get to all of that. But to begin with, I just want to get some fabric on the cup. So I'm going to get my Mod Podge ready. So I think somebody asked to do it with the dishwasher. So we will use the dishwasher safe Mod Podge, since that was a request. I just like to work out of a plastic cup. That's personal preference, but it's just personal preference. So I shook up the Mod Podge really well because this one especially has been sitting for me. I don't tend to use the dishwasher as much. And I just realized the camera's out of focus, so I'm hoping it's going to come back into focus. There we go. Okay. So we are going to start with the tumbler. Now, I'm using a 30 ounce. If you're using a 20 or one that's straighter, it's even less complicated. I like to start so that my seam is going to be where my logo is. Not necessary. You're not really going to see it. Personal preference. So I will start with the middle of my fabric opposite my logo. No, it doesn't matter. And that's what I had said earlier. I have 3 of them out down here. I really didn't care, but somebody asked about dishwasher, so I figured I'd go with the dishwasher. And actually, there's a very good chance when I go to put my overlayers that I use different Mod Podge because I'll just use whatever I have out if I'm using it for something else. So, never fear. I'm going to use a foam brush. It's not like glitter. There's nothing rough that it's going to catch on that I have to worry about. And I will put on, actually, it's going to be hard to see because I base coated this white. But a decently thick layer. It's not going to be as thin as I do when I do glitter. Not super thick, obviously, but it doesn't have to be as thin as we sometimes think it has to be, if that makes sense. Hey, Karen. Yes, everyone, check out that link that Kylan just posted. There were several of you as we were getting situated that said you were brand new, hadn't tried epoxy yet. That is our sister group, and they are going to sort of take the super basics of epoxy over there to allow this group to continue to kind of move forward. So now that I've got a decent, I've only done, you know, a section about that wide in my Mod Podge, but that's good enough to start. And I'm going to, I don't know if anyone else does this with Mod Podge. When I work with Mod Podge, I like to put it on and give it a second so it gets really tacky. If you put it on just super wet, sometimes it's not sticky yet. So I give it just, you know, a few seconds before I lay it down on the fabric. Now, since I'm using a 30, I don't know how well this is going to show up. I'm going to focus on the top piece first and lining up the top piece. Someone just said the link's not showing. Lynn, if you're on mobile, links aren't live until after you're live. After the live ends. So, I will now go ahead and push it up against this skinnier part of the 20 as well. And then I'll pull it back, and I'm going to add more Mod Podge, quite a bit more Mod Podge actually, to some of these spots, because it's just not, especially when you're working on the 30s because of that lip. Don't be afraid to over Mod Podge it. You can't put too much on, quite honestly. So now as we start to work around, especially on this 30, we were going to start to make sure we're adjusting for this lip. Again, if you're working on a 20 or something without that lip, you don't have that concern, but make sure as you're stretching out your fabric, putting your fabric on, that you are accounting for that lip and getting it good and stuck down there. That is a spot where I find it's easy to get those air bubbles that then when you start to epoxy, you're like, uh-oh. So initially right now, I am just trying to get this fabric stuck with no air bubbles. I'm not going to come over to the seam yet, and I'm not going to worry about saturating this fabric yet. I'm just getting it on the cup. And give me just a second. I'm going to cut a piece of this. I have some parchment over here to protect my work surface. I'm going to cut a piece to keep my foam brush on. Same thing. I'm trying to make sure I stay in frame. I'm sorry if I don't. The delay definitely, I go to check and I'm like, oh wait. So, again, use whatever Mod Podge makes you happy. They're really all the same. In fact, there's a video out there. And at this point, I'm not really pulling it a lot. Now, that's going to depend a little bit on your fabric. This fabric has way more stretch to it than I would like it to have. And I want to be sure that I'm not stretching it. So you're going to want to tug it just enough to keep it straight-ish, smooth. Let's say smooth. Just enough to keep it smooth on your tumbler and tight, but not so much that you're stretching the material. Does that make sense? Yes, for anybody who's in mixology, they have a how to get started live tomorrow. Is it 1 o'clock tomorrow, Kylan? I might have the time wrong, but it's tomorrow. And then we have a live here on Saturday with Kylan on the vinyl wrap. So right here where I'm working on this lip, I don't know if you guys can see how loose it is right there. So I don't want that. So that's where I'm going to sort of pull on that fabric a little bit and get it where it's snug. So don't rush this part. You want to make sure that you're getting your fabric on smooth, but at the same time it's not the final stage. So some of you may have seen we had a poll up yesterday about how you guys want to access the resources. So we will be working a little bit tonight and over the next couple days to bring all those resources back in to Facebook from Google Drive. You guys had an overwhelming opinion on that. So we will be working on that. Facebook has given us the ability to format those posts a little bit now, so that may help. I feel like this is a little bit of a boring part. You're kind of just watching me add Mod Podge and then hold it still, but and that's just because you want to give that Mod Podge time to catch the fabric. You don't want to rush it. You want to I press down on it a little bit and let the Mod Podge kind of come through, but you don't necessarily have to. I'm blurry again. Are we back in focus now? Maybe. Can I zoom in from here? I can zoom in from the other phone. Okay, that's cool. I didn't know I could do that. Brenda, this much is easy. This much, we haven't gotten to any of the hard part yet. All we've done is Mod Podge and fabric. All the way around. Yeah, Megan, so what I like to do is apply some Mod Podge. We should be back in focus now. And then kind of hold the fabric to it. You'll see again in just a second. Now that you're zoomed in, you might have a better view. So what I'll do is I'm going to put a speck of Mod Podge on here. Now that you guys are zoomed in, you can see it. And then I will actually take the fabric over it, kind of pressing on it a little bit, and just sort of hold it there. You can really feel the Mod Podge start to come through the fabric and know that it's starting to stick. And don't be afraid if you think you're using too much Mod Podge, because you're going to cover this in multiple coats of Mod Podge. You're not using too much, I guarantee. So again, I just sort of push my hand on it and hold it just a second or two. And same thing with the bottom. It was a colored tumbler that I primed and then stripped and then primed. Primed it, made it a tumbler, stripped it, and just put a little bit of primer back on it. Now we get to the part that people get thrown off, okay? So first of all, I'm going to zoom out just a smidge. You guys are really close. And that's this seam. So first of all, if you notice, our fabric has angled up. That's because of where this lip is, okay? We're not worried about that. We chose a fabric that it wasn't going to be a big deal, remember? So we're going to, the way I like to do this is go ahead and keep taking this piece of fabric to about here. And then I'm going to bring the other piece of fabric, overlap it, and then cut it. So you'll see what I'm saying in just a minute. But while I'm at it, I need to add a little bit more Mod Podge to my cup. So in this little bit I'm about to do, I'm really not worried about a perfect stick because some of it's going to get cut back off. But for me, it's just the best way to get a nice crisp seam that I've found. So you can tell I got a little bit of a bubble there. I'm just sort of working it back out, pulling the fabric a little bit to get it where I want it. I'm going to go ahead and trim just this corner so that it's not too overwhelming of excess. Just get it out of my way. Because a lot of that's going to get trimmed off here in a second. All right, I am going to, because this fabric is so stretchy, I'm going to go ahead and cut on this fabric before I wrap the other side. And I'm just going to use my rotary tool, again, because the fabric is stretchy. It's not going to cut through my tumbler, so I'm not worried about that. But it's going to hopefully give me and then again, because I was working over that logo, even with the rotary blade, there was a little bit of scissor work to do to get it perfect. So I'm going to let that sit for just another second before I pull the other piece over to it. So it is good and stuck. So I don't know if you guys can see this bubble that I've got going on right. Oh, let me get you back in focus. I forgot you guys were zoomed in already. This bubble that I've got right here, that we don't want. So that would be somewhere where we want to go ahead and start working that fabric to make sure we're getting rid of that. So in this case, I'm going to actually peel up. You can tell that that had already started to stick. Peel that up and add some more Mod Podge and work that out. Bye, Kylan. Yeah, if you're somebody who likes your rotary cutter and already has it, it's a great way to do it, because if you think about it, it's not going to cut through your tumbler, so you don't even have to worry about your self-healing mat, but you get a crisper line than with scissors. So don't be afraid to get your finger in it. Don't be afraid to, it's Mod Podge. And I'm going to let that sit for just a second. And I'm just going to sort of feel the rest of the tumbler. Make sure I don't have any other bubble spots. And we'll talk about how to deal with it if you find that you do have some bubbles, but the less you have, the better, the smoother finish you're going to get when you get to the next part. So I do tend to pay extra attention to this seam just because it's kind of the part where it catches up the most. And again, if you were using a 20 ounce, especially if you were using a skinny or a fatty, but even just a regular 20 ounce taper that doesn't have the lip, it's going to be a much smoother finish. All right, so I've given that a minute or two. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. And I'm just going to bring this fabric all the way over to here. And I expect it to overlap, and I'm okay with that. That was quick, Kai. Again, I'm not worried that I have some streaks in here because I'm going to press on them. And I'm not worried that I've gotten some on this other piece of fabric because it's already covered and it's going to continue to be covered. You're going to see in just a second. So I'm going to, again, work my lip, then work my way up, and work my way down. Yes, replay will be available. All right, so now we've got it wrapped and we're overlapped and it's not ideal, right? So I'm gonna go ahead right now and put a coat of Mod Podge just up and down, straight on this strip where we've overlapped. Both under, let's see, over the first piece, under the second piece, and over the second piece. And again, some of this is because of the fabric I'm using that has this much stretch that's starting to curl up, but that's okay. And I'm going to put some directly over that seam as well. over that overlap. And we're going to let that dry. Not all the way, but a decent bit. And we're going to come back to it with our rotary tool or scissors. I'm going to use the rotary tool. The seam will be, but this is going to be, like right now it doesn't look pretty, okay? And we know that. Let me zoom you back out. But we are going to, once this dries, we're going to cut a new seam all the way through both layers. But we want it to get good and sticky and dry and hard. Before we do that. It would actually work better with fabric that isn't stretchy, Patricia. So this one was made from like a fabric quarter kind of thing. Fat square or whatever they call them. Cotton. Works much better. The stretch actually is, I would prefer it not to be stretchy. But I could not find this fabric not stretchy. Not for lack of trying. So I'm going to let this dry for just a minute and see if there's any other questions that we missed. I think we've got them all. We are all caught up. We're just going to let this dry for a second. Fat quarter, that's it. If you guys were tuned in at the beginning, I literally took what I had as like half a yard of fabric from another project and just laid it down and just cut. I would say I probably used about this mat size, so it was probably about 12 by 12, 13 by 13. So for those that may have tuned in before with this, when we talked about broken seals, this is a remake of that same fabric, or that same cup, that somebody put in the dishwasher in the bottom rack on full heat. All right, I'm gonna trust that this is close enough. I'm impatient tonight. Obviously, if you have more time and more patience, let it dry a little bit longer. If you don't, then don't. So, I'm gonna use my rotary tool again. You can do it with scissors. I've done it with scissors. Most of the time I do it with scissors, but this time I'm not. And I'm just going to pick a point where I know that it is overlapped, so I can feel, let me zoom you guys in again. I can feel right here where the overlap in the fabric is, and I'm going to pick somewhere in the middle of that. And I'm just going to go straight down. Being careful around that lip to get a good around the lip and the logo if you have a logo on your cup. And then I'm just gonna, and I'm just gonna snip where I didn't get it, which is right in the middles of those logos, I'm pretty sure. And again, if this fabric weren't stretchy, this would be an even smoother end. Now, I cut straight through that, right? So anyone who's familiar with rotary blades knows it cut through both layers. So I'm now going to come down to this layer underneath, do the same thing where I have snips. And you can see that's right where my logo is. So maybe you don't want to line your seam up with your logo if that's something that's going to bug you. Okay, so I just realized that was probably not in frame great. So now I've taken the underneath of this other part, and now this will line right back up with little to no overlap. Depending how, again, your fabric, if your fabric has give, you might have a little bit more than if your fabric doesn't. So using that rotary tool allows it to cut through both layers right at the same time, which then allows you to get it to line right back up. And if you need a little bit more Mod Podge, there's no such thing as too much Mod Podge. I'm just using my finger to come right over the seam. I'm dabbing the Mod Podge on and then using my finger to come over that seam and just make sure that the seam is well coated. And I'm also feeling for if there's any like overlap or fray or anything funky I want to contend with. So I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes before we do anything else really to it. If I weren't doing a live, I would let that dry all the way before I do the next part. And actually, I might. In fact, I think I'm going to. We're going to call that for tonight. And we will do a part 2 where we do the top and the bottom and begin adding coats of Mod Podge to the outside. So we're gonna stop at this point. This really, if you can get this nice and dry, especially right there at your seam, then the next part is gonna go much more smoothly. So I'm gonna let this dry and we'll come back, who knows, maybe tomorrow night? Probably not tomorrow night. I don't know. We're going to come back one night and finish up the bottom and the top. But it's just a case that if I start trying to fiddle with it now and this isn't dry, I'm going to have, there's a bubble in there I got to get fixed. I'm just going to be pulling at the seam when I try and fix spots, and that's not gonna help anything. So if you're working along and you notice this coat is dry and we haven't yet done the tops and bottoms, then you can just start adding coats. I usually do, after this layer not counting, 3 to 4, closer to 4 more. You can't overdo it, but you can definitely underdo it. So, and again, just, as it's drying, you're just gonna almost pet your tumbler and feel for where those air bubbles are, those loose spots might be. Not so much worried about the very top yet or the very bottom yet, but, if in the core base of your tumbler you're starting to have a bubble, then you want to start working it out. And again, I think anyone who's done it would agree, the spots that tend to get the bubbles are either at your ridge if you're using a 30 or near your seam. So we will schedule part 2. We'll make sure you guys know, and we will do the tops and bottoms maybe tomorrow evening. I just want to give this Mod Podge time to dry, and I don't think you want to sit here and watch Mod Podge dry. Are there any other questions on this far that we can answer in the meantime? A couple other announcements, just a reminder, we have a live in here on Saturday for vinyl wrap, full vinyl wrap on a tumbler. That is Kylan, and she is going to be using a fatty tumbler, I believe. So if you're going to be working along with her. In the mixology group, they have a live scheduled for tomorrow at 1, if you're in that group as well. Some introduction stuff over there. And we are going to be working on getting the rest of this schedule out, including the rest of this fabric tumbler and the, we're going to do some other, basically for the rest of June, we're going to focus on wraps of some shape or form. So fabric, paper, vinyl, etc. You don't know if you have enough patience, Kimberly Lynn. You do. So typically, it's a little different tonight because I knew I was doing this live, but typically I would do it where I have this out and I just throw a coat of Mod Podge on every time I'm working on something else. So, don't forget to be checking the announcements here in the group, the events, and keep in mind that after your overwhelming response last night, we will be moving all of the files over to Facebook. Oh, and one other thing, if you've gotten this far and you have a scrap of your fabric left, don't throw it away yet. We're going to need a circle of that scrap as well. Yes, Jessica, it will. The link is always on the event for the replay. Crystal, you see what on sale? What did I miss? I missed the first part. I see it on sale at Hobby Lobby and got some, but I can't get it to wrap. Yes, Sally, we will get to the epoxy on this. We're just not there yet. It's going to take a lot of coats. So here's the thing, if you're not aware. If you were to go ahead and put epoxy on this cup now, it may not show a ton because of the black, but you would see darkening of your fabric. It would almost look like grease spots on your fabric. That's where the epoxy soaks in. That's why we have to get quite a few coats of Mod Podge to really seal that fabric so it doesn't soak in the epoxy. So we're going to work this cup beginning to end. But Sally, if you have a lot of questions about epoxy, check out the mixology group because they're doing all epoxy questions. All right, I don't see any other questions for now, so we're going to go ahead and wrap this up for tonight. I will post and let you know when we are going to do the bottom and the top. And all you'll need for that is scissors and more Mod Podge when we get to that. So, as always, feel free, if you're watching the replay, give us hashtag replay, ask your questions. We will do our best to answer them. Under the bag. Under the fabric, a tumbler. So actually, Laura, we are just in the process of wrapping it up. So go check out the replay. I know, Susan, but overwhelmingly everyone wants it back on Facebook. So we are going to. You just have to bear with the fact that if you open a file from Facebook on your mobile app, it may not quite format as easy to read, but that's just my personal. Yep, Sally, if you check out, well, if you scroll up in the comments, I believe Kylan linked it, and it is our sister group, for lack of a better term, and it is focused on epoxy basics, the basic of basics of mixing and the chemical reaction of the epoxy. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up for tonight. Let us know if you have any other questions, and we will call it a night. So that's it. We will see you all next time.